Thank you. Good evening to you all. I know it's been a long evening, so we just have a few more awards, so thank you for bearing with all of us. I'd like to thank our hosts, distinguished guests, fellow awardees, sponsors, family, friends, and my team at Elan International. I also would like to thank those wonderful singers and musicians we had today. Let's give them a round of applause. Before I go any further, I would like to thank our divine creator for giving me this day and allowing me to receive this award and to be with you tonight. Mauricio, thank you for that great introduction. USAID is one of our clients, and we've done work for the past several years with USAID. And I know that it's been a challenge because USAID has been one of those organizations that could do better with small businesses, but since you've been there, we're noticing the change, and we're really here to support you, and we're going to continue to do great work for you. Joan, I have to tell you that from being one of the over 6'2" people, I recruited Lawrence, who was my intern last summer, and he plays professional basketball in Europe. And Shamika, who's also tall, who's a good friend of my family. And so, so I recruited them. Okay. I'd like to thank Mountaintop Marketing Group and the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation for honoring me with this International Business Award. I'm not one to usually seek recognition. I usually kind of shy away from it. But Michael Bose, I want to thank you personally for your support, and thank you for all the work you do in being a national small business champion, because you truly are, and you deserve every recognition you get. I mean, $200 million of contracts, that's amazing what you've done for small businesses. Whenever I go to award ceremonies like this, I personally want to know, who is this person on stage? How did they get to where they are, and what are they doing for me lately? So let me tell you a little bit about me, and because, you know, one person's success is really everyone's success, because one person alone can't do it. And I started out, I didn't plan to go into international trade. I was a little girl growing up in Washington, D.C. I'm a native, so those of you natives, I'm one of you. And I grew up in D.C. in an area called, Northeast D.C., called Trinidad. And those of you that may know Trinidad, it was on the national news for being locked down last year because of the number of murders in the area. But one of the things that kept me and my brothers out of jail or being dead was that my mom and dad really took their time and made us focus on education. And they kept us out of the streets. They were only high school educated, but they instilled in me the desire to be the best that I can be, to be a good person, to not worry and be happy, and to call on that presence we call God. They are the ones that taught me to think big, to dream big. Because of them, I always knew that I wanted to leave D.C. And my vision at the time of leaving D.C. was to go to Philadelphia, to University of Pennsylvania. So that was like, I'm getting out of the city, going to college. But really, in the process, before I did that, I spent time reading National Geographic and seeing this wide world around me that I never thought I would get to. I spent time looking at inaugurations every 4 years. Never thought I would get to an inauguration. I've gotten to some of those. I also spent time looking at the Academy Awards. And this is my Academy Award. So you'll have to, so you all have to bear with me. You know, we had the purple carpet and everything. I was like, flowers, you know, this is great. Anyway, little did I know that expanding my horizons meant travels to countries like New Zealand, India, Senegal, South Africa, Philippines. In fact, will the delegation from South Africa stand up? We acknowledge you, but nobody stand up. Yeah, there they are. And this award I would like to dedicate to my parents who have since deceased, and I'm so glad to see Michael's mom here. Enjoy your mother, because, I mean, our parents are so much a part of us, and so I know they're smiling on me at this moment. So anyway, how did I get to international trade? Well, I started off working with IBM in sales and marketing, but I needed a job in Washington, D.C., and I ended up getting hired to do, in the International Trade Office, to do lobbying on a lot of trade policy issues. Now, what did I know about international trade? Nothing. And so what happened was that they told me that they wanted to hire me to do international trade because they felt it was easier to train somebody about international trade than it was to train them about IBM. And those of you that work in corporate America know how long it takes to find out organizational dynamics and all that. So you know what I'm talking about. Now, so in my first 2 months on the job, I got told to do some trade policy on something called anti-dumping. If any of you ever heard of anti-dumping, that's the most craziest, arcane trade law in the world. I'm not a lawyer, so I spent 2 months day and night reading this trade legislation. And so I ended up getting on a plane, going to Geneva, trying to represent IBM's position on the trade policy. Well, needless to say, I learned trade policy, and then I ended up working on NAFTA and GATT and all the alphabet soup of trade legislation. Now, why is this important? Well, 96% of consumers are outside the United States. And listen to this, folks, every $1 billion of exports supports approximately 17,000 jobs in the United States. Now, it's a fact that our recession would have been much worse had we not exported. So those of you that think, why are we doing international trade, we would be really in the ditch if we hadn't been doing these exporting from the United States. And it's critical that we as smaller minority businesses capitalize on these opportunities, because if 96% of your consumers are outside the United States, duh, don't you think that there's a lot of opportunities? And now there's a certain amount of risk within international trade, but what do they say? No risk, no reward, no guts, no glory. And because I escaped from my neighborhood in DC, I decided to get adventurous, and I decided to take this opportunity to see the world and to work on international trade. Now, what happened was, one day I was sitting minding my business. You know how sometimes life kind of gives you that phone call? And I got a phone call, and somebody said, do you want to work for the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative? And I'm like, it's 1995 in January. President Clinton was not doing that great in the polls. If I take this job or I pursue it, I may only have 18 months of work. So what did someone do? I went and talked to my vice president of IBM, told him what I was asked to do, and he said, look, Phyllis, this is one of the opportunities that you can only get in Washington. This is what you're here for. Just go for it. If you only have 18 months, you only have 18 months. What the heck? Life is not promised, so just go for it. So I took his advice, and of course, Clinton got reelected. So I ended up becoming the Assistant U.S. Trade Rep for Public Liaison and Intergovernmental Affairs. What does that mean? Well, I had the most wonderful job in D.C. I ended up having to represent and interface with businesses on international trade issues. I interfaced with CEOs of large companies, small companies, because we manage advisory committees. So I knew the CEOs of IBM, Motorola, all of them. I have stories won't even tell you. But it was really a great experience. Traveled to Geneva, Singapore, and it was wonderful. And I remember thinking, gee, I'm just a little Northeast girl on the plane with the White House staff. It was great. Now, what happened during that job, we started an Africa Advisory Committee when I was there, and that increased my knowledge of that continent. And I have really had a focus with developing countries, because my personal philosophy is if we raise everyone around the world, that benefits everyone. And the way out of poverty is through business development. And so what we can do worldwide will help everybody, because as you know, nowadays, what happens in America is not just in America. What happens overseas is not overseas. We are a global economy. Now, I could tell you stories about what has happened, but what happened was after I left IBM, I spent IBM, I went to the U.S. Trade Representative's office. After a certain time, politics, you get tired of it. You let me go back to business. So I started my company in 97. And I could tell you stories about training women in Lesotho on handicrafts, developing business plans for a pharmaceutical plant in Kenya, conducting workshops in Southern Africa, working with Boeing in India on aviation training in a conference. But I can also tell you stories about going through villages and seeing the medical doctor in Senegal, and getting beat up with a chicken. That's another story I'll tell you offline. Getting stuck in airports because the planes were canceled, being in the middle of an uprising in Zimbabwe, getting tear gassed at WTO meetings in Seattle, hosting delegates from India and keeping one of them out of jail. But we don't have time for that. I will only say that the opportunity is global, and we are missing the boat as smaller minority businesses if we don't capitalize on it now. We need to position ourselves to do it. And we need more language training in our schools. We need to learn Arabic, Chinese. We need to tell our kids to learn these languages. Just so you know, I chair the Maryland, D.C. District Export Council. We're volunteers appointed by the Secretary of Commerce, and we're committed to assisting businesses in exporting. So if any of you are interested in exporting that live in Maryland or D.C., see me, because we have lawyers, you have freight forwarders, we do free advice, we do conferences, we really help businesses around to help you export. I feel very blessed, and I'm committed to helping improve the conditions of people in developing countries and also in our own through exporting and international trade. I'm going to continue to work in this arena. My son couldn't be here. He stopped in earlier, but he's working for the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, so you know he's busy tonight. But he told me that he was very proud of me and that I was a role model for him. It is those moments that keep you going and excited and to keep you, getting up every day and fighting the battles. But I love what I do, and I want to thank you for this honor. And I would also like to thank all the people that have worked on this event. Thank you so much, because it's wonderful. Thank you, Mountaintop. Again, goodbye, thanks.